Hello, everyone, and welcome to another BookTrib author interview, a Merrill Moss Media production. My guest today has been called the master of existential thriller and labeled one of America's best thriller writers and one of the 21st century's most exciting authors. He's the author of a new novel called Killing Maine, which is the second in the Pono Hawkins series following the bestseller Saving Paradise. We are giving a copy of this book away on BookTrib, so if you're interested in winning it, head over to booktrib.com and enter to win there. Hello and welcome, Mr. Mike Bond.
Hi, it's very nice to be here, Joel. Thank you for the invite.
Fantastic. So glad to have you. Tell me a little bit about Killing Maine. What has Pono gotten himself into this time?
Well, Pono is a Special Forces veteran from Afghanistan and Iraq and a surfer, basically at this point a correspondent for a number of different surfing magazines. And he's kind of a guy who takes care of people, who takes care of his country, who tries to do the right thing. That's what the nickname Pono comes from. It's Hawaiian meaning to do the right thing, to take care of family and country. So that's kind of where he's at, and he gets a call from an old girlfriend who's now married to another Special Forces guy who saved Pono's life in Afghanistan, and this guy is in deep trouble back in Maine for supposedly having shot an environmentalist, and Pono, the girlfriend, his ex-girlfriend, begs him to come back to try to save his buddy, to find the real killer, as it were, or at least get his buddy out of jail. So that's how it all starts off, and of course for Pono it goes downhill from there.
Fantastic. And so we are in a completely different setting. We're in Maine this time. What was that like to transition from Hawaii to Maine? I know for you kind of live in both those worlds anyway. So was that a difficult transition or was it easy?
Well, as Pono says at the start of the book, or close to the start of the book, it was 88 degrees when he got on the Delta Red Eye in Honolulu, and it was 17 below when he got off the plane in Portland, Maine. So he did not find that humorous. He's underdressed for the occasion. He didn't bring along a lot of clothes. He ends up having to wear his buddy's clothes that don't fit very well. He has spent enough time in Maine as a younger man, as a boy, really a teenager, that he goes out and visits the family cemetery and talks with all the ancestors, and then he goes up to central Maine to visit his buddy in jail and also his ex-girlfriend. So he gets used to the cold. One of the things that happens in Special Forces is they try to kill you in many different ways, and one of the ways they try to kill you is to freeze you to death. So if you can go through Special Forces and end up in Afghanistan at 10,000 feet, there's not too much cold you need to worry about.
So a lot of Killing Maine is about the deterioration of the natural landscape at the hands of energy corporations. What inspired you to write so prominently about this?
Well, basically what inspired me is in all my books is a huge problem. My books are about things like stopping elephant poaching or stopping human rights abuses in Latin America, or the war in the Middle East, the wars in the Middle East. I write from the position of having been there, being there, and trying to make my readers feel what it's like to be there, to really be there. And what drove me to write Killing Maine was similar to what drove me to write Saving Paradise, the first Pono book. The first Pono book, Saving Paradise, is about the island of Molokai. It's about all of Hawaii, but principally the island of Molokai, which has been rated by the National Geographic as sixth most beautiful island in the world, and it's just a magical place. And a bunch of extremely wealthy foreign corporations and domestic ones got together with a bunch of well-paid politicians and planned to cover the entire island of Molokai with these hideous windmills, which do no good for climate change or anything like that, but make tons of money for the politicians and the investment banks and energy companies. So he ended up fighting the windmills in the first Pono book, and then he finds that his buddy in Maine is enmeshed in the same dangers, that basically Maine, and this is true, is being taken over by utilities from all over the East Coast that are building these horrible wind turbines all over the beautiful mountains of Maine. So that's kind of the backstory which drove me, Joel, to write the book.
Now, can you catch us up a little bit? You say these horrible wind turbines. What is it about wind turbines that is not helping the environment and might actually be harming conservation efforts and environmental protection efforts?
Yeah, it's a real tragedy, because we all started out thinking that wind was going to be a great savior. We were going to be able to generate half of our electricity from wind eventually, and it's turned out in the 20 years since then that all we've ever generated is a lot of money for politicians and special interest groups. The problem with wind, it turns out, is that because wind is so erratic, going up and down all the time, you need, before you can feed it into the grid, you need to keep that level of power established or stable. And in order to do that, you need to run fossil fuel plants full time behind wind projects to keep the wind projects balanced in terms of the amount of power they send into the grid, or you can cook the grid or have a brownout, which has happened frequently with wind. So by the time and also wind projects only run nationally on average with about 20% of their supposed power, which means when one of these grandiose statements comes up like we'll power 45,000 homes, it really means it'll power about 9,000 homes part-time with additional coal burning required. It unfortunately is a huge scam. It has had there are 90,000 or more windmills now in the world. They slaughter birds and bats. They drive people from their homes. They ruin tourism and property values. They destroy wildlands because they're usually sited in away from people because people hate them. And it's a real tragedy. All this money needs to be going into rooftop solar if we really intend to make a dent in the CO2 footprint derived from electric generation.
So sort of while we're on the topic, you've authored many articles on climate change. In your opinion, where do we stand right now as a country in terms of understanding and warding against global climate change?
Well, we've done some good things, but there's a lot more needs to be done. Again, the Obama administration talks a good story, and they have been implementing an enormous amount of wind projects through a thing called the production tax credit, which basically gives utilities and energy companies the right to build these darn things anywhere, and the taxpayer has to pay for them. And again, the problem is, the Obama administration, for instance, got $71 million in contributions in its two campaigns from the wind industry, and has returned, given the wind industry $62 billion in subsidies, direct subsidies and grants and loan guarantees. So the wind industry has got a 900 times return on its investment in the Obama administration. And they've been ruthless in tearing apart our wildlands. So we're not really very far down the track. And at the same time, the Obama administration has leased an enormous area of Wyoming for strip mining for coal to send to China, which will be equivalent to 62 million automobiles. He's just opened the Arctic to Shell, which is again going to put millions and millions, billions, trillions of tons of more CO2 in the air. So we talk a good story, but in reality, we are the major climate change producer, and we do nothing to really work on what the major part of climate change producing gases is, which is the transportation sector, which is about 68% of our total CO2 emissions and other emissions, equally horrible. So I wouldn't say that we're doing a good job at all, Joel. Worldwide, the first thing we need to do is put rooftop solar on every single small structure, whether it be a residence or a small business in the world. If we did that for starters, and then we started letting people plug their electric cars into the rooftop solar, we could get rid of 3/4 of all of the CO2 emissions that the human world is presently creating.
Why do you think we don't do that?
Well, because I mean, we're silly if we think that the people of the United States actually have any impact on the government. The government, I mean, we have an impact, sure, but the government is largely controlled by huge corporations that pay to get given politicians elected and others defeated. When it costs $30 million to run a Senate campaign, or $60 million, most of that money comes from corporations who have an agenda that they want that politician to follow, in which the politicians pretty much generally follow very well, which is why we don't have really very much public representation in the U.S. government today, nor in any government in the world, except maybe Iceland. Iceland's the only country I know of that people actually seem to run the place.
So, talking a little bit about the environment on a more personal level, in one of your previous interviews with BookTrib, you spoke about how you turn to the environment for the emotional and spiritual peace that's hard to find in the modern world. So, do you find that being out in nature is enough to facilitate this peace, or do you also implement practices like yoga and meditation?
Yeah, for me, the outdoors is my meditation, and whether I'm mountain climbing or hiking or swimming or diving, those are about the things I love most. That is that is what drives me, if you wish, and also wishing to protect it and being around wild animals. I'm very fond of wild animals, whether they're elephants or wolves or bears or katydids. It doesn't matter. I'm particularly fond of birds. And so I have a natural urge to protect them, which is another reason why I'm so hostile to these wind turbines. They just slaughter birds by the thousand. But it's a funny thing that there's a theory, not a theory, it's just a recognized thing in biology, which is called shifting baseline syndrome. And they found in the fisheries business that, or in fisheries biology, that the mistake they were making is they were charting fishery populations on an annual basis without regarding what they used to be. And that's one of the things that happens with us all, is we live in an environment and we don't realize what it was. I mean, in Manhattan, for instance, you walk down to the corner, I don't know, 34th and Lex or wherever it is, and try to imagine the forest that was there before, the streams, the animals. Same thing anywhere almost in any suburb or city in the United States. It's hard for us to remember or realize what we've lost, and what we've lost is really important, because all my books are about living deeply, and you can't live deeply in the absence of the environment.
Would you say that our sort of disconnect from the environment is our biggest blockage to that peace you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. It's when the Puritans didn't think about sex. We don't. An example that comes to mind is recently someone was telling me of a woman, justifiably from New York City, who had been in a campground once in her life. She'd gone out west and been in a campground and had parked her vehicle right next to the all-night light. And when the all-night light went out because there was a power failure or something, she went crazy because she'd never been in darkness before. And I've seen that with people that when I was younger, I was an outfitter. I worked, the kind of people that take you on horseback trips into the mountains. And I remember people who were afraid to walk barefoot on grass. And yeah, it's a terrible tragedy. And in order to, my feeling about living deeply is that in order to make the correct decisions in your life, what do you want to do with your life? What are the major things you want to do? In order to do that, you have to live deeply, because it's living deeply that teaches us what's important in our lives. And when we're cut off from the environment, as you said, Joel, we don't live deeply. We don't live with a full richness and awareness of life, and the consciousness that death is there at every step waiting for us and can take us at any time. Which is why I make such a fuss about not wasting time, not wasting life, not watching television, not doing silly things, not doing what the culture tells you to do, but do what you want to do. Because we never know. We only have a second or 10 years or 50 years. We don't know how much time we have left.
So you do talk about this a lot, this living deeply and being present. What would you say to someone who, let's say, is years in or maybe decades in to a career that they suddenly realize isn't fulfilling for them? When you get to that point, where do you start to try and find yourself?
That's a good question. It's a very important one. And what the North American Indian tribes, many of them, said was, whenever you can't decide what to do, remember your own death. And remember that you're going to die, and try to imagine what it's like being dead. Not that there's much chance in my view that there's much comes after, but maybe, we can always hope for the best. But to bring oneself down to earth. That's why they call it, having your feet on the ground, bringing yourself down to earth. To demand the truth from yourself. I mean, in my career, there's been plenty of times I've been caught up in stuff and realized that other perhaps than financially didn't have much benefit. And it's another, and I'm just attacking this question, Joel, from various angles. It's another real virtue to writing. Because, and I mean everybody should write, every single person that can should write, and if it's only 15 minutes a day is fantastic, if somebody can do 15 minutes, just to do a journal. Because what it does is it allows you to see yourself from exterior eyes, from some form of objectivity. And it also allows you to review the past, because our memories will betray us, and it's very important to have actually data, if you wish, from the past, which can be in the form of a journal. Why did you do so and so? What were you planning? And it's a question of becoming a good friend to oneself. And in order to live deeply, you have to care about yourself. Not to the exclusion of other people. Other people can still come more important to you than yourself, but you cannot denigrate or deny yourself. You have to realize that, or we have to realize that our lives are precious and it shouldn't be wasted.
Is that where your drive comes from? Because you can go back and watch our previous author interviews. You've done a lot in your life, and you've climbed many figurative and real mountains. And I'm just wondering, is that where the drive comes? Is that how you fight off lethargy?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the difference. When I was younger, I'm a little old for it now, and I've paid the price, but when I was younger, I loved to play football, but I wasn't that interested in watching it. And I mean, who wants to watch digital things float across a plastic screen when you could go out and do it yourself? Because football is an absolutely wonderful game and shouldn't be restricted to people in college and to people in the pros. Everybody should play football, particularly women, because it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And so I think it's really important that we do real things and not false things. And I was going to write a blog recently. If you're depressed, climb a mountain. And I wasn't depressed at the time. I was just busy climbing a mountain. And it occurred to me that if you were depressed, as I could certainly remember being in many times in my life, if you're depressed, going out and climbing a damn mountain is fantastic because, first of all, it exhausts you, it wearies you, it makes you breathe hard, it makes the blood pound through your brain, and makes you revel in the majesty and beauty of the world. So you forget to be depressed, And I'm always reminded of these kind of things when one time when I was living in Paris and there was a story about some 17-year-old boy threw himself in front of the metro because of some girlfriend that didn't treat him right. And it's very sad, but I reflected immediately if he'd made it to 25, he probably wouldn't have even remembered her name. And we got to be careful about being depressed because it can just be totally unnecessary. And so go climb a mountain. Get physically involved in life really makes a huge change in how we feel, which is a problem with living in the cities. Going to the gym ain't enough.
So what are you reading now, or have you read anything lately that's really inspiring you?
Oh, I just read, most of the stuff I read is in French, because I've spent so much of my life there. And French literature is extremely rich. I just finished a book by a magnificent French writer named Christian Signol, Signoll, and I think several of his books may be published in English, but he wrote a book called Les Enfants des Justes, which means the children of the just, and it's about farm country in south central France during the Nazi occupation, and one old couple's attempt to save two Jewish children. Let's see. I just read Alan First's Red Gold, which is a marvelous book if you like reading about Paris again in the time of the Nazi occupation. I read a lot of Greek history, Roman history, stuff like that as well. I read everything that comes near me. I'm dangerous. I read everything. I even read Donald Trump. I even read what he has to say. No, there's nobody that I would not at least read. And I tend to rather prefer to read direct rather than what people say about people. So, yeah, but I probably read a couple hours a day, usually between 1 and 3 in the morning when I can't sleep.
Getting back to Killing Maine, there's a bit in this book that really affected me about a veteran who has lost his arms and his legs, and about the nature of courageousness and horrors of war. And that little bit, that chapter was so vivid. I was wondering if you have a personal experience with those sort of injuries, because it was so vivid. It felt so real to me.
Well, like most of In Killing Maine, it was real. I'm talking about a real guy, and who had come back, who had joined up and gone over to fight Iraq 2, as well as Afghanistan. And Iraq 2, of course, was such a sham, such a lie. I cannot believe that Bush and Cheney are not in jail for war crimes, which, it's funny, Bush's national security advisor, Richard Clarke, has recommended that Bush be tried for war crimes, as well as several others of the top administration have recommended that. So it's a tragedy when somebody is injured or killed, even if it seems necessary, i.e. protecting family, friends, country, whatever. But when you have this in a situation where the war was totally unjust, there were no weapons of mass destruction, not a one. There was no, Bush and Cheney both were war evaders. Neither of them had fought in Vietnam and were anxious to prove that they were tough. And so they went and destroyed a puppet that America itself created, which was the Saddam Hussein administration. But so when you have the young people who go off to war to defend our country in all good faith and end up shattered and destroyed with metal arms and metal legs, and all of the horror that goes along with that, as I say in the book, Bill, those are the absolute most heroic. We have many heroes from these wars, and my website is very big on, as I am, on veterans' rights and taking care of veterans. But one of the most important things is if we're going to ask some young woman or man to risk her or his life, we have to make absolutely sure it's justified, which Iraq 2 was not. Nor was Iraq 1 for that matter. We intrigued or kind of we enticed Saddam Hussein to invade Kuwait intentionally. So all of this shows up. I mean, I have friends who are crippled from the war. I know other guys who are crippled from the war. It drives me crazy.
Is Pono your favorite of your characters? That's a hard one.
He's certainly up there. He has a great love life. He's always in love with 3 women, which of course is a very enviable situation for any guy, except it gets you into more trouble than it's worth sometimes. But particularly when the women are very smart and don't like each other. So, and as Pono says, the sexiest thing about a woman are basically the 3 sexiest things about a woman are kindness, honesty, and brains. And when you're ending up living with 3 women who are kind, honest, and very smart, your life is in great danger. So yeah, I like Pono a lot. I really do. I like particularly the hero of my African book, The Last Savannah, the guy who goes out, who runs an anti-poaching squad, and which I was involved in when I was there, and goes out to kill poachers and save the elephants. And he lives a very deep. All of my characters tend to live a very deep life. They're they're fighting for our country. They're taking care of the people they love. They're trying to live a good life all at the same time.
Speaking of poaching, I just want to get your opinion on the whole Cecil the lion thing. Obviously, it caught on. It was a huge story, a big response. But one of the things that came out of it was I started hearing this argument about how poaching was somehow beneficial to the animals themselves in a population control way.
Yeah. Well, when you consider that an elephant gets killed every 15 minutes, 100 elephants a day, that the population has declined from over 30 million when I was there in Kenya now down to perhaps less than 2 million. And it looks like in 10 years at present rate, they will be gone entirely. They will be extinct. And you can still have a few elephants left in zoos. That won't matter because the variety in the DNA will be insufficient to keep the race, the species alive. So poaching is a horrible thing. It in no case has any valid relevance as some form of environmental control. Whether it's, I mean, right now there's a lot of poaching as well of the big cats, the tigers, leopards, cheetahs, lions, mostly by American big game hunters, these horrible human beings who think that killing an animal with a high-powered rifle from 200 yards away represents some form of manhood. It's disgusting. And the Chinese are the major drivers behind the ivory poaching, and they refuse to desist. So it's a horrible thing. Mm. And I had no compunctions whatsoever about a poacher being killed when I was there.
Sort of a weird question, potentially, but you're politically active. So I was wondering, let's say I had a magic wand, I make you president tomorrow. What's the first thing you're going to work to fix or change?
What would be the first thing to change politically? Mm-hmm. The corporate ownership of the American government, by far. The fact that under American law, since the 1870s, corporations have been treated as persons, which they're not, and free, therefore, to do all kinds of destructive things that they would not be free to do if they were persons. And basically, they own the government. In some cases, over 95% of a politician's funds that she or he needs to get elected have come from major corporations. You take a look at what Goldman Sachs gives to, and that's just one investment bank, to our major politicians. To Barack Obama gave similar amounts to others in the past. And as these corporations have a very specific agenda, what they want, and they tell the politician, "We'll give you 20 million. You do what you're supposed to." And in killing Maine, Joel, I actually managed to copy a formula used by the wind industry to try to determine how much money they have to give to a politician. It's called corruption. I call it corruption rate of return. They call it contributions rate of return. And in Maine, for instance, which is considered, well, by its own citizens as extremely corrupt, which it is. In the Gallup poll, it's 49 out of 50. The only state worse being Illinois. Maine is a very crooked state politically, and it's principally because of the influence of corporations. And they come to Maine because they can buy the politicians very cheaply, and they buy them lock, stock, and barrel. They own them. Such to the point that some major Democratic politicians consistently introduce into the legislature, into the state legislature, bills that are written entirely verbatim by corporate lawyers for specific corporations. So that would be the first thing I'd change.
And I think it's really admirable as somewhat of a political junkie to hear you criticizing all politicians equally for this, both sides of the aisle. I just want to throw my own comment in there and say that's really admirable. And I like when people don't take sides and sort of see the political schema as a whole. And I love that you're doing that. I think you're totally right about that. How
It's actually
did...
true, Joe.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say it's actually true. If you look at the corruption, the amount of money taken in and the amount of favors done is as atrocious on the Democratic side as it is on the Republican. And I always, growing up in a left-wing household, I had the impression that Democrats were at least somewhat more moral, and it's delightful to find out that they're not. They are just, and the Obama administration has set new records for corruption and immorality in government, principally through how it establishes regulations. And it can establish regulations even without any vote from Congress. And then it goes back to the corporation and says, look, we're looking at the possibility of restricting such and such a mining process, which they know will completely handicap the corporation. And the corporation says, well, we'd like to give you some money so that at least our side of the story gets told. And that's how it's done from the regulatory side of things. There's a marvelous book on it called Extortion, written about this precise process on both the side of the Democrats and the Republicans. I recommend it to everyone out there, called Extortion. It will make you want to stop paying taxes immediately.
Well, I could talk about this all day, but unfortunately we're coming to the end of our session. But I want to do a somewhat new feature here, and it's called Rapid Fire. So these are very quick questions, very quick answers. They're mostly A or B questions. So I wish I had like intro music for it. So imagine intro music. Rapid Fire. Here we go. Kafka or Camus?
If what? I'm sorry.
Kafka or Camus?
Oh, Camus.
Graveyards or asylums?
Graveyard or what?
Asylum.
Oh, hell, I'll take asylum anytime. That's known as life.
Hemingway or Hugo?
Both.
Blackjack or poker?
Poker.
Winter or spring?
Spring. That's the most fun. That's like young love.
Français ou espagnol?
I'm sorry, I lost that one again. My computer is not a very happy computer. Please say it again.
Oh yeah, we got some lag out here.
Français ou espagnol?
Tous les deux. Los dos. Spanish and French.
Nature or space?
Nature.
Nature. Thank you so much for... That's true. And cold and vast and horrifying.
Those were great questions anyway. Thank you very much, Joel. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. We've been speaking with Mike Bond again, the author of Killing Maine. Again, we are giving away a copy of this book, so head over to BookTrib.com for a chance to win that. Thank you very much for talking.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.